are you? And where are you going? Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want? Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
What can I say? Technology failed me. No introductory bumper today. A fitting almost end to a week of technology troubles. But in any event, I'm Kevin Bemmel, and I'm your host here on Jiggers' Place, where we meet every other Thursday. And we have a cocktail and a schmooze. And so it's good to be here. I know I missed 2 weeks ago. I was sick, unfortunately, but now, back and happy to see you. See, got my 11T togs on and ready for the week to be over already. We have summer weather again in winter here in Southern California. And I know for a lot of people, especially on the East Coast where you've been buried with snow, you're thinking to yourself, boy, that sounds fantastic. But I have to tell you, it's too hot. We always want what we can't have, I suppose. So on today's show, I'm going to be talking about the book Gulliver's Travels. Now, if you're of my vintage, you probably remember a cartoon version of the book that was really made for kids. Or maybe you remember the Disney version, which was meant for family audiences. But I've never seen a movie or a cartoon or anything that does justice to this book. That was written around the earlier part of the Enlightenment period here in the West. And has so many things to say that are as relevant today as they were 200 years ago. 300 years ago, when the book was written in 1726. I know it's de rigueur these days that anything, I think, more than 6 or 12 months old has no applicability to our lives. But I hope to. If that's your perspective, I hope to challenge that perspective this afternoon. So, in honor of Gulliver's Travels, ChatGPT really outdid itself, helping me come up with a themed cocktail, and this cocktail is called the Houyhnhnm and the Yahoo, which, as you'll learn in a little while, refers to two. They're not really even peoples. The Houyhnhnm were horses. The Yahoo were humans, although, as you'll see, pretty disgusting humans. It brings the two of them together in the fourth part of Gulliver's Travels, really the darkest part of the book. And so the idea, and this is a very complicated cocktail. We'll see if I can pull it off. It's a layered cocktail where you put in the Houyhnhnm, and then I have to carefully pour the Yahoo part of it on top of it. The idea is they should not mix immediately, but only gradually. So, we'll see how it works out. That's always one of the fun parts of the show. So, I'm going to talk more about the Houyhnhnm and the Yahoos when we're sitting over on the love seat, but you'll see that the cocktail is basically a representation of the juxtaposition of pure reason, for all the Trekkies out there, right? The sort of, Spock. I forgot the people that he was from. But anyway, pure reason, Vulcan. There it comes. The Vulcan perspective from the sort of the the unbridled human desire represented by the Yahoos. Okay, and so the first part, the Houyhnhnm, is made with regular London dry gin. I'm going to try this Highclere Castle gin. I think Highclere Castle, by the way, is the castle that's used in Downton Abbey. So for those of you who saw that episode of Jiggers' Place a while back, you know I'm a big Downton Abbey fan. Beautiful bottle, isn't it? Kind of a bluish, purplish bottle. And there's Downton Abbey, which is actually Highclere Castle. This is a 43.5% alcohol by volume, or 87 proof gin, and I'm gonna mix that with clarified green tea and some Fino sherry, just a little bit of Fino sherry. And then the Yahoo cocktail is made with overproof gin. You've seen my broker's gin before. This is a 47%, 92 proof gin. So a little bit higher than normal, not hugely overproof the way you think about whiskeys, where you might have a barrel strength that's 100 proof, 120 proof, something like that. This is just a little bit overproof. I didn't want it to completely overwhelm the other ingredients. And that's going to be mixed with some wildflower honey that's been lightly thinned, and some Bitterman's Orchard Street bitters, and then just one small basil leaf that's been bruised. Okay, so it's going to take a little while, so I'm going to get going on this. Okay, so first we're going to start out with 1.5 ounces of London dry gin. And here we go. Oh, and you know what? Once again, I forgot ice. Give me 30 seconds. Okay, because this cocktail is made in 2 parts, and I didn't want the ice to melt, I meant to do it at the very last minute, and then I got distracted, and there you go. So I forgot to preset the ice. Okay, so we've got our London dry gin, 1.5 ounces, and then we've got let's see, 1/2 ounce of the Fino sherry. Pour that in there. Put this back. And, oh yes, and then a teaspoon of the clarified green tea. Let's find the teaspoon, 1 teaspoon. Okay, and we're gonna stir this. I'm gonna be putting it in a Nick and Nora glass, and as I talked about before, that comes from the Thin Man, Nick and Nora Charles. That's what they drank their martinis. They drank them in this sort of squared off glass, I guess. Call it that, and it became known as the Nick and Nora glass. William Powell and Myrna Loy, right, started the movie back in the 30s. Okay, so this is the Houyhnhnm. Okay, I'm going to set the rest of this aside. And now we're going to make the Yahoo. So the Yahoo starts off with just a half an ounce of the high proof, higher proof London gin. A bit more. And right, got to show you the bowler hat, right? That's one of the things I love about Broker's Gin. Okay, and then a quarter ounce, I believe, yeah, quarter ounce of the wildflower honey. Okay, oops. I just made a mess. What are you going to do? Okay, and then 2 dashes of the Bittermans, Orchard bitters. 1, 2. Okay, and then 1 tiny leaf of basil. And we're just going to shake this briefly. Now, presumably this is lighter than the other layer, and so when I pour this over the back of a spoon, it's going to float on top. Let's see if this works. And I don't think it is. I think the honey makes it too heavy, but it's an experiment. Okay. And here's what it looks like. There are no layers, unfortunately. You know, sometimes the cocktails work out and sometimes they don't. Let's give it a taste. It does have a layered taste. Okay, see you over on the left side. So, if you get my emails, there we go. So if you get my emails, you know that you have the cocktail recipes in it in the emails, and it talks about how this is a challenging cocktail. So it's not meant to be delicious in the way that many of the cocktails are that I make here on Jiggers Place. It's meant to challenge our palate, and this cocktail definitely does. There's a lot of competing flavors, and it's certainly not a sweet cocktail, despite the small amount of Wildflower Honey. It really does challenge your palate, but I encourage you to try it out anyway, especially if you like things that aren't sweet, or you can appreciate the range of flavors and bitterness, which this is definitely a more of a bitter cocktail. I think you will find it quite interesting. Okay, so on to our subject. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. So you can see it is not a long book, okay? And you may be saying, well, but maybe it has really small print. Well, the print isn't huge, but it's not minuscule either. You know, the book can definitely be read in a short time. It's, let's see, this particular version is, what, 219 pages long, I think? Yeah, 219 pages long. So this is not a long book. This was an inexpensive classic edition on, you know, some bookstore that prints classic editions printed this. Courage Books, an imprint of Running Press Book Publishers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, right? You know, so I'm pretty sure when I bought it, it didn't cost more than a few dollars. And I know you can find all kinds of versions of Gulliver's Travels on Amazon. I will put a link to the book on Amazon. It's going to be an affiliate link, you know, full disclosure. If you use the link to buy a book, I think I get, you know, 3 cents. But if you can see this front cover image, that's Gulliver, and he's being tied down by the Lilliputians. Okay, that's the first. That's a scene from the first part of the book. Okay, so just some background. So a lot of people think of Gulliver because of the Disney cartoon that dates, I think probably, I want to say to the maybe late 1930s. A lot of people think of Gulliver's Travels as a story for children, but it was not, at least the way Jonathan Swift intended it. Indeed, it was a satirical novel, and it was written in the early period of novels. So back in the time that Tom Jones was written, these are some of the earliest English novels. And the idea was to write a story that was commenting on the society and culture in England at that time, and in so doing, create a readable, interesting way to explore ideas, as opposed to writing a treatise like you know, John Locke, or, you know, one of the you know, Enlightenment philosophers, not John Rousseau, Jacques Rousseau. I guess it would be John in English, but so by putting his ideas in the form of a novel, Jonathan Swift was making them more accessible to people than had heretofore been the case. So I mentioned the book was written in 1726. Lemuel Gulliver, the eponymous character, is a ship's surgeon, and he's on a voyage, and he travels to these strange, sort of fantastical lands. And I'll talk about those in just a minute. And it really, it seems, I think, strange for us today, where novels of fantasy, whether they're my brain is failing me, the ones, oh gosh,
you go see them at Universal Studios. Anyway, where there's magic involved and wizards and witches and all that kind of stuff. That was not the character of so-called fantastical novels 300 years ago. So it was fantastical in the sense that it created just another world. Harry Potter is the one I was trying to think of. Harry Potter. So the story was meant to grip you and involve you in it, and from that perspective, there's no question that Jonathan Swift was successful. So as I mentioned, the novel is divided into 4 parts. The first part takes place in a land called Lilliput. Gulliver is shipwrecked in Lilliput, and the Lilliputians are this tiny people, little miniature people, and they're only about 6 inches tall, so maybe about that tall, right? And so Gulliver, being a full-sized man, is a giant compared to the Lilliputians. And at first, they treat him as this sort of giant, curiosity, but eventually they look to put him to use for their own sort of political and ends, and use him to try and solve their military dispute. So imagine if you're 6 inches tall and a 6 foot or 5 foot 8 inch man shows up, right? He'd be the greatest warrior in your life. So the Lilliputians, he divides them into these sort of absurd factions. So there's the high heels versus the low heels, which is a satire on British political parties of the time. The Tories, this is before the Labour. It was the Whigs and the Tories at that point. The Whigs being the more liberal party, the Tories being the more conservative party. So you have the high heels and the low heels, right? And then you have the big Endians and the little Endians. And these were representative of the religious divide going on in England at this time between Roman Catholics and Protestants. And there were actual wars that were happening between these two political factions. And Gulliver helps the Lilliputians defeat their enemies, which are I'm reading this name because I want to get it right, the Blefuscu. But after the Lilliputians are victorious, Gulliver refuses to enslave the Blefuscu, and at least completely. And so eventually Gulliver falls out of favor with the Lilliputians, and that part of that first section of the novel ends. So he in this section of the book, he's using this idea of these sort of miniature people to expose the pettiness of human disputes, and by shrinking the people physically, he is in essence emphasizing the pridefulness of their political and religious disputes, and showing that in essence these kinds of disputes are all out of scale with what should be going on. Okay, so that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book, Gulliver finds himself in a land called Brobdingnag, and in Brobdingnag, the Brobdingnangians, try and say that 3 times fast, especially after having a cocktail, are giants compared to Gulliver. And so now he's in essence, the tiny person surrounded by all these huge people. And this sort of flips what has happened before in the book on its head. So now he's displayed as this curiosity who's very vulnerable, right? They could crush him in their fingers if they wanted to. And the king of Brobdingnag questions Gulliver about England, and Gulliver talks about European politics and war and technology. And the king is horrified at what Gulliver tells him, and he decides that the English are the most pernicious race that's ever lived, and they're basically like these odious tiny vermin is really what the conclusion he comes to. And so now that he's comparatively reduced in size, he sees the Brobdingnagians as these huge people, and of course every single flaw, every single aspect of them is huge compared to Gulliver, and he sees all the blemishes, the huge pores, skin pores in that sense, and all of the blemishes that these people have. And it strips away what had previously been this sort of idealized picture that Gulliver has of humanity, right? So he's seeing it in all of its kind of almost filth, but certainly with all of its faults. And the idea of the second part of Gulliver's Travels is that oftentimes our perspectives are relative, right? So if someone can be evil, but if they treat us nicely, we may look upon them as a wonderful person. And someone may be a wonderful person, but because they did something to us that we didn't like, they're the filth of the earth, right? And by the way, without getting into the politics of it, but we see this playing out, right, with this whole Jeffrey Epstein scandal, right? So all these famous people thought he was this great guy, I suspect because he flattered them and he invited them to, his homes with all this wealthy stuff, right? And yet he was always a completely evil human being, right? But people lost their perspective. And by the way, I'm not excusing any behavior, but people lost their perspective in dealing with him. I suspect because he was a very flattering guy and he really played upon their vanity. And so the contrast between Lilliput and Brobdingnag shows us we have to be careful in how we perceive other people and make sure that we're doing so accurately and not being seduced into perceiving them differently than they are. Okay, and so then from there, he voyages to a more sort of fragmented place, or fragmented really places. So, Laputa, Baldnigbarbi, Lugnag, and Glubdubdrib, right? These are not names it's easy to keep in one's head. And this third part of Gulliver's Travels, it satirizes science and philosophy and intellectual pride. And again, I think this is a very timely issue for us, where there's this sort of, reverence for reason and science is this immutable thing that can never be questioned, even though the core ideal behind science is to always be questioning, to search to get ever closer to the truth, but science is never settled. Talk to any scientist. Okay, one of my longest standing and closest friends, Delroy Baugh, has been a scientist for over 4 decades. And when we talk about this, he laughs at this idea of settled science. And it has nothing to do with his politics. It has to do with his devotion to what science really is, right? And so Laputa is this sort of floating island, and it's ruled by these sort of abstract-minded scientists and mathematicians, and they're so absorbed in theory that they neglect anything practical. And if you don't think this happens today, I think it was earlier this week or maybe the end of last week, I was listening to a podcast, and the hosts were talking to an economist, and he actually said that because people, the group of people he was criticizing, have no theory for their explanation of an economic situation, they should be ignored. Now that's ridiculous on its face. To say that theory trumps reality is just silliness, right? But he would be a Laputin essentially, right? And we can hear that, we can hear that sort of in our minds how ridiculous that is. But there are people alive today who actually believe that, as is evidenced by, I'm not going to say his name. I don't believe in embarrassing people, but this particular economist, he believes that. He said so on this podcast. And by the way, this was not some crank podcast. This was a very mainstream podcast. It produced by a very well-known news organization. Okay, again, I don't want to embarrass anybody, so I'm not going to say which one. But if I told you the name, almost for sure you would know the name of the news organization. Okay, and then the Balne Barbie. So they're experimental scientists, and among the Balne Barbie, Swift is satirizing scientists who do these crazy experiments that have no practical application. They're just, again, sort of lost in thought. The Age of Enlightenment was the beginning of the blossoming of science, and there were all kinds of experiments going on. But unlike, for example, Benjamin Franklin's experiment flying the kite and figuring out that lightning indeed is electricity, there were all kinds of silly things going on, as there are now. It is somewhat surprising some of the science or some of the experimentation that goes on that is considered to be so amazing, so fantastic, right? Okay, another sip. Okay, and then in Lugnag, Gulliver meets the Struldebrugs, and these are immortals who keep on aging rather than dying. So they're sort of the reverse of Merlin, if you're familiar with The Sword and the Stone. And so what he finds is, rather than eternal life being a blessing, these Struldebrugs, they're miserable, they're senile, and they become very isolated because they essentially cut themselves off from the rest of the world. And so in this third part of Gulliver's Travels, Swift is satirizing the blind faith in reason, speculative science, and to a certain extent, the Enlightenment belief that all progress, that progress always improves life, right? So like the idea that, okay, now, human beings are never going to die. And what he's showing is that does not improve human lives. And indeed, he really questions whether advancement actually advances humanity, making humanity wiser or happier, right? So he's questioning one of the core tenets of the Enlightenment, which is all progress is good. Okay, and then in the fourth part of Gulliver, the fourth and final part of Gulliver's Travels, so we meet the Houyhnhnms and the Yahoos, about for which the cocktail was designed. And this is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is Gulliver. This is the darkest of the four voyages that Gulliver takes. So the land is ruled by the Houyhnhnms, that are these super rational horses of all things. And they live by reason and truth and simplicity. So they're very much like Vulcans, for the Trekkies. They have no word for lying. So if you're familiar with the movie Galaxy Quest, and the people who seek out the commander, so they are in some ways like the Houyhnhnm, because as you see in the movie, I'm not giving anything away. By the way, it's a fabulous movie. I think I did a show on the movie Galaxy Quest. They don't understand what lying is. In this case, they're too innocent. Okay, and the humans of this land are called the Yahoos, and they're filthy, they're greedy, and they're violent creatures who essentially represent a very sort of degraded state of humanity. And as he grows more disgusted by the Yahoos, Gulliver starts identifying more closely with the Houyhnhnm, even though they're horses and he's a human being. And eventually, though, the Houyhnhnms, who Gulliver seems to respect, they reject him because from their perspective, he's too much like the Yahoos. And so Gulliver finds himself repulsed by the Yahoos, rejected by the Houyhnhnm, who eventually expel him from their land. And so he returns to England. And back in England, Gulliver can no longer tolerate human company. So he's too sort of disgusted by it from interactions with the Brobdingnags, through whom he's seen all of the flaws of humanity, and the other people who idolatrized reason, and the other peoples who made a fetish of science, and the Yahoos, who were just disgusting, and he comes to prefer the company of horses, just regular horses in England, and he becomes estranged from his family. And so in this section, Swift is satirizing certainly humanity stripped of all illusions, right? And driven to greed and pride and all of the deadly sins, and yet he comes to find that the pure reason of the Houyhnhnm the horses is also not desirable at all, and so it just leaves him completely cold, and so he's left completely unsettled and feeling like he has no place in the world. And it's a very, melancholy ending to the book, to say the least. So, if you're a regular watcher of the show, you know that I approach matters of life from a moral perspective, or from the perspective of what does this mean morally, right? And Gulliver's Travels is a novel that is helping us look at the moral quality of our society. And that's why the book is as relevant today as it was 300 years ago, because that question is an eternal question. And again, we see it playing out here in the United States with competing groups claiming that they represent true morality, right? And we're left to figure out, does this group, does that group, neither of them, both of them, somewhere in between? Where does appropriate, proper morality actually exist, right? And so I've got several major themes of Gulliver's Travels that I want to share with you. So one of the things, the first theme is the corruption and pettiness of politics. I hope no matter where you are on the political spectrum, that you would agree that this is what's going on in the United States right now. So Swift mocks political parties, war, divisions caused by religion, as trivial and ego-driven. And indeed, I think a lot of them are. And so Lilliput really represents a political system built on vanity rather than on principles, right? And our country, which is at least supposedly built on the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, right? American society and American politics are supposed to be built on principles. Is that where we're at today? Okay. The second major theme is the relativity of perspective. And I talked about this when I was talking about Lilliput and Brobdingnag, right? That are we really seeing things as they are, or is our perspective being skewed because of how someone is treating us or some other factor? So Jonathan Swift uses size as his perspective, his issue of perspective. But of course, size isn't the only one. And so we need to make sure that we're seeing and understanding things clearly and not from a relativistic point of view. Okay. Number three theme is human pride and hypocrisy. So Gulliver himself becomes an object of satire. So at first he sees the Lilliputians as ridiculous, but then when he becomes the miniature among the Brobdingnags, he becomes an object of ridicule, right? And this is this is exposing oftentimes the hypocrisy of human beings. And to paraphrase a line from the movie The Big Chill, it's hard to go for a day without a good hypocrisy. It's very difficult not to be hypocritical. And yet, I think we have to try, and we have to recognize when our own behavior and our own actions are perhaps somewhat hypocritical. Okay? It is human nature. And I think we both need to, at times, excuse the hypocrisy of others. Not the huge hypocrisies, of course, but the little hypocrisies of daily life. We need to excuse them as much as we need to receive grace from others for our own small hypocrisies. Okay, theme number 4, reason versus passion, right? And we see this in the conflict between the Houyhnhnms and the Yahoos, right? And we also see this in the third voyage, where Swift satirizes reason and this sort of ridiculousness of science. The fact of the matter is, as human beings, we have emotions, and we're not going to subjugate our emotions through reason. And I would argue we should not aspire to do so. To do so would be to be devoid of empathy. It would be to create a very cold, isolated society. And that is not a society in which human beings can flourish. We need to love. We need to love at times passionately. Even if the results of that passionate love are a slap in the face or a kick in the gut. And to share just just recently had that happen in my life. And I will tell you quite candidly, despite the pain of what turned out to be an unrequited love, I would not give up how I felt about this woman for anything. And it was on some level a completely crazy thing. And I'm very grateful that I had that experience. As human beings, we need to love. We need to experience passion. And, in contrast to the experience I just mentioned a moment ago, I met someone about a week and a half ago who is just cold to the passions of life, or many of the passions of life. Certainly the passions of life that involve being involved with other people. How colossally sad for this person. A lovely, lovely young woman. Okay. And talking to her, she in essence wants nothing to do with humanity. It's sad for her. It's sad for the rest of humanity who won't get to experience, as I described her to her, I said, you are a kick. And I'm very grateful I got to spend time with you and get to know you a little bit. Okay. Theme number 5, the limits of progress. Progress is not linear. This is, I think, one of the most foolish beliefs that we have as human beings have. Progress is not linear. Sometimes things change and purportedly progress, and they are not good for us as human beings. They're not good for our culture and our society. They are, in fact, harmful to our society. And so I think we need to approach progress with some skepticism. As an example, I take social media. Social media has done some good things. It's created a path whereby people who maybe before could not have been financially successful now can be financially successful. At the same time, they have created ways to be financially successful that are predatory on our fellow human beings. And so, like anything, social media, it's not good or bad. It's an is. How we use it determines whether we've used it well or used it badly. Okay? And that's just one aspect of social media. We could talk about how, on the one hand, social media allows us to stay connected with people that we or find people we've been wanting to re-engage with, and allows us to re-engage with them. I know my older sister Marla has used social media that way. It's been fantastic for her and for the people with whom she's reconnected. And at the same time, social media can make us extremely isolated. From a relationship standpoint, is social media good or bad? And the answer is yes. Depends how we use it. Okay, so that the limits of progress. And then the last major theme, number 6, misanthropy and disillusionment. So the novel gets successively darker with each voyage. And what begins as a political satire really ends up being a very disturbing critique of human nature itself. And as I mentioned, we see at the end of the novel, Gulliver becomes estranged from human society and decides it's better to live with horses. How sad. How sad. What an isolated, terrible way for Gulliver to spend the rest of his life. Yes, we're human beings. We're flawed. Of course we are. But we also have in us greatness. We have an aspect of God, the divine in us. And the one of the essential goals of life is to engage with other people despite their flaws, their weaknesses. And I would argue that perhaps not the only goal, but one of the most important goals of loving someone is to love them because of their weaknesses, because of their flaws. To recognize that, but for those weaknesses and flaws, we could not possibly hope to have that person in our life. If that person were truly perfect, what are we compared to that person? And why, unless they were God himself, why would they ever have anything to do with us? And I think the honest answer is they wouldn't. They'd be an angel, and they would not live among human beings. Because angels don't live among us. They sometimes perhaps mix among us temporarily, but they don't live among us. And it's on that thought that I'm going to wrap up this episode. I hope that you have someone in your life that you can love deeply, and that perhaps I've given you a way to continue loving them when they're driving you crazy. Whether it's your spouse, your children, close friend, another family member, a parent, a sibling. Learn to love them because they have faults. Don't become Gulliver, who decides he's better off living with horses. So, I thank you for joining me. And I'm glad to be back here at Jiggers' place. And you know what? I was in a meeting earlier today, and I happened to mention this show. And one of the people I was meeting with said, we're going to have to get together and have a drink. And I said, you know what? Come by on a Thursday when I'm doing Jiggers' place, and we'll have a cocktail and a schmooze together. If you're going to be in the West Los Angeles area and you want to join me here at Jiggers' place, drop me an email. All my social media links and my email address are in the show notes when this episode posts on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Maybe I'll make a cocktail for you. So thank you so much for joining me. Of all the shows that I do, this is the one that I hope will truly have an impact on your life. And I'm going to sign off with the person up in Shemayim, up in heaven, that I love so dearly because of how she loved me and how she let me take care of her in the last year of her life. Marie, darling, you are and ever will be my belle. Courage at all times, my friend.